Hello there, and welcome to Before Law, where we step quietly into the shadows between what we know and what we've forgotten, where ancient whispers still echo through time, and where the line between history and myth grows beautifully thin. Tonight, we're not going to discuss the rise and fall of empires you learned about in school, or trace the familiar paths of conquest and civilization that fill our textbooks. Instead, we're going to ask a question that has haunted humanity since we first looked up at the stars and wondered if we were truly alone. What if the gods of antiquity were not merely products of imagination, but memories of something real? What if the beings who walked through ancient temples, who shaped the destinies of kings, who taught humanity its first arts and sciences, were not symbols or metaphors, but actual entities who once ruled this earth? Before we begin this journey into the depths of forgotten history, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening tonight, and what draws you to these ancient mysteries. Are you someone who questions the official narratives? Someone who feels that beneath the surface of accepted history lies something far more extraordinary? If these kinds of deep explorations resonate with you, feel free to let me know by tapping that like button. And if you'd like to join our growing community of curious minds, consider subscribing, but only if it feels right to you. Tonight, we're going to walk carefully through the evidence, through the stories carved in stone and whispered across millennia, through the consistent patterns that emerge when we look at humanity's oldest memories. We're going to explore the possibility that our ancestors weren't creating fiction when they spoke of gods who walked among them, but were instead preserving the most important truth they knew. So settle in, perhaps dim the lights, and let your mind open to possibilities that mainstream history has long dismissed. Because tonight, we're going to examine whether the gods of antiquity were real, whether they once ruled this earth, and what it might mean for our understanding of who we are and where we came from. In the cradle of civilization, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers carved life from desert sands, the ancient Sumerians pressed their stories into clay tablets with an urgency that speaks across 5,000 years. These weren't casual tales told around evening fires. They were official records, historical documents that the scribes believed contained literal truth about the origins of their world and their people. Among these tablets, we find something that should make us pause and reconsider everything we think we know about early human civilization. The Sumerians wrote extensively about beings they called the Anunnaki, a word that translates roughly to those who came from heaven to earth. But these weren't distant, ethereal deities dwelling in some unreachable realm. According to the tablets, the Anunnaki were physical beings with bodies, needs, hierarchies, and very human-like personalities and conflicts. The story they tell is both fascinating and unsettling. According to these ancient records, the Anunnaki came to Earth not as benevolent visitors, but with a specific purpose. They needed workers. The tablets describe how a class of lesser divine beings, the Igigi, had been laboring to terraform the planet, digging canals, building irrigation systems, and preparing the land for habitation. But eventually, these workers rebelled. They threw down their tools, burned their equipment, and demanded relief from their endless toil. Faced with this crisis, the great Anunnaki held council. The god Enlil wanted to punish the rebels harshly, but Enki, the god of wisdom and water, proposed a different solution. Instead of forcing the Igigi back to work, they would create a new species entirely, one designed specifically for labor. And so, according to these tablets, humanity was born not from divine love or cosmic accident, but from necessity. The process described in these texts is remarkably specific. Enki and the goddess Ninhursag are said to have mixed clay with the blood of a sacrificed god, creating the first human prototypes. But this wasn't a simple, one-time creation. The tablets suggest there were multiple attempts, various experiments, as if the creators were refining their design through trial and error, until they achieved beings capable of both survival and service. What makes this account so compelling is not just its detail, but its tone. This isn't the language of myth or allegory. It reads like a technical manual, a historical record of genetic engineering, described in the only terms available to ancient people. The mixing of clay and blood, when viewed through a modern lens, sounds remarkably like the combination of organic material with genetic information, the kind of biological manipulation that we're only now beginning to understand ourselves. The tablets go on to describe a complex hierarchy among the Anunnaki themselves. Anu ruled from the heavens, while his sons, Enlil and Enki, governed different aspects of Earth. Enlil controlled the atmosphere and commanded authority, while Enki managed the waters and was portrayed as more sympathetic to humanity. This wasn't a pantheon of perfect, unified deities, but a dysfunctional family of powerful beings with competing agendas and very real conflicts. These conflicts had profound consequences for humanity. Time and again, the tablets describe tension between Enlil, who saw humans as merely tools to be controlled, and Enki, who often acted as humanity's protector and secret benefactor. It was Enki who warned the hero Atrahasis of the coming flood, just as later traditions would tell of Noah receiving divine warning. It was Enki who gave humans forbidden knowledge, teaching them skills and wisdom that Enlil preferred they not possess. This dynamic appears throughout human mythology in various forms. The tension between authoritarian control and the gift of knowledge, between those who would keep humanity ignorant and subservient, and those who would elevate us despite the risks. It's a pattern so consistent across cultures that it suggests something more than coincidence. But perhaps most intriguing is what these tablets tell us about the nature of these beings themselves. The Anunnaki are described as having incredibly long lifespans, living for thousands upon thousands of years. The Sumerian king list, one of the most puzzling documents from antiquity, records rulers who reigned for tens of thousands of years before the Great Flood. After the flood, suddenly, human lifespans contract dramatically, and kingship passes into fully mortal hands. This transition suggests something profound, a time when beings of extraordinary longevity governed directly, followed by their withdrawal and the beginning of purely human rule. The Anunnaki didn't simply vanish. According to the texts, they retreated, pulling back from direct governance while leaving behind the structures and knowledge necessary for human civilization to continue. The archaeological record supports the idea that something remarkable happened in ancient Mesopotamia. The sudden appearance of complex writing systems, sophisticated mathematics, advanced astronomy, and urban planning suggests not gradual development, but the rapid transmission of already developed knowledge. The Sumerians seem to emerge with their civilization nearly fully formed, as if they had inherited it rather than developed it organically over centuries. Their astronomical knowledge was particularly advanced. They understood precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that takes 26,000 years to complete one cycle. They had detailed knowledge of planetary movements and could predict eclipses. They divided the circle into 360 degrees and the year into 12 months, systems we still use today. This level of sophisticated understanding typically requires centuries of careful observation. Yet it appears in Sumerian records almost from the beginning of their written history. The Sumerians also possessed metallurgy, advanced agriculture, and architectural techniques that allowed them to build massive ziggurats that served as both temples and, according to their own accounts, landing platforms for the gods. These weren't primitive peoples gradually discovering civilization. They were inheritors of knowledge that seemed to come from elsewhere. But perhaps the most compelling evidence lies in the consistency of their accounts across thousands of tablets spanning centuries. The same names appear, the same relationships, the same historical sequences. If these were merely myths or religious allegories, we might expect them to vary more widely over time, to evolve and change as all stories do. Instead, they maintain a remarkable consistency, as if they were historical records being carefully preserved. The Anunnaki, according to these records, eventually departed, leaving behind only their human creations and the knowledge necessary to maintain the civilizations they had established. Some texts suggest they returned to the heavens, while others imply they retreated to hidden realms beneath the earth or across the seas. But their influence didn't end with their departure. The concept of divine kingship, the idea that rulers derive their authority from the gods, spread throughout the ancient world, as if it were a memory of a time when gods actually did rule directly. This pattern of divine beings establishing civilization and then withdrawing appears in cultures around the world, often with startling similarities to the Sumerian accounts. In Egypt, they spoke of the Zep Tepi, the first time, when gods ruled directly before retreating to the heavens. In India, the ancient texts describe periods when divine beings walked among humans before ascending to celestial realms. In the Americas, similar stories tell of culture-bearing gods who taught humanity and then departed with promises to return. Could these all be independent inventions, similar stories arising spontaneously in isolated cultures? Or do they represent fragments of a shared memory, pieces of a historical truth that was preserved in the only way possible by peoples without our modern understanding of genetics, technology, and space travel? The Sumerian tablets force us to confront an uncomfortable possibility, that our understanding of early human history may be fundamentally incomplete. They suggest that humanity's rapid development from hunter-gatherer societies to complex civilizations wasn't the result of gradual evolution, but of intervention, guidance, and perhaps even genetic manipulation by beings whose capabilities far exceeded those of primitive humans. These aren't the ravings of ancient science fiction writers. They're the carefully preserved historical records of humanity's first civilization, written by scribes who believed they were recording actual events. The question we must ask ourselves is simple. Were they wrong about their own history, or are we? As we continue our exploration in the next part of this investigation, we'll journey beyond Mesopotamia to examine similar accounts from other ancient civilizations, accounts that may corroborate and expand upon what the Sumerians preserved in clay. We'll look at the evidence hidden in plain sight, in monuments and myths, in genetics and geology, in the persistent human memory of a time when the gods walked among us. But for now, consider this. If the Anunnaki were real, if gods once ruled the earth, then everything we think we know about our origins, our development, and our place in the universe may need to be reconsidered. The implications are staggering, and the evidence, as we're about to discover, extends far beyond ancient Mesopotamia. As we venture beyond the clay tablets of ancient Mesopotamia, our path leads us to the banks of the Nile, where another great civilization preserved memories that echo the Sumerian accounts with haunting precision. In the shadow of pyramids that still defy complete explanation, the ancient Egyptians spoke of their own age of divine rule, a time they called Zep Tepi, the first time. Unlike the modern tendency to view ancient Egyptian religion as purely symbolic, the Egyptians themselves treated their accounts of divine kingship as historical fact. Their sacred texts, carved into temple walls and preserved in papyri, describe an epoch when gods didn't simply inspire from afar, but ruled directly from thrones of gold and lapis lazuli, making laws, judging disputes, and governing with the immediate presence that only physical beings could provide. The Egyptian tradition tells us that before the first mortal pharaoh ever wore the double crown, a succession of divine rulers held sway over the Nile Valley. These weren't abstract theological concepts, but specific individuals with names, reigns, and documented histories. The Turin Papyrus, often called the Turin King List, records dynasties of gods who ruled for thousands of years each. Their reigns measured not in human decades, but in geological epochs. Ra, the sun god, is said to have ruled for thousands of years before passing authority to Shu, god of air, who in turn gave way to Geb, ruler of earth. Each divine pharaoh governed for periods that dwarf human lifespans, yet the records treat these reigns as literal historical facts, not mythological allegories. The parallel to the Sumerian king list is impossible to ignore. Both civilizations, separated by vast distances and different languages, preserved nearly identical memories of extraordinarily long-lived rulers who governed before the flood, before recorded history as we understand it. What makes the Egyptian accounts particularly compelling is their integration with astronomical observations of stunning precision. The ancient Egyptians understood that the star Sirius followed a cycle that matched almost perfectly with the flooding of the Nile, and they built this knowledge into calendars of remarkable accuracy. But they claimed this astronomical wisdom came not from centuries of patient observation, but as a gift from Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, who descended from the stars to teach humanity the secrets of the heavens. The architecture of ancient Egypt provides physical evidence that seems to support these extraordinary claims. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built with a precision that challenges modern engineering capabilities, incorporates mathematical constants like pi and phi that weren't supposed to be known until millennia later. Its internal chambers align with specific stars and constellations, with an accuracy that requires not just sophisticated understanding of astronomy, but the ability to predict stellar positions across thousands of years. The pyramid's construction itself presents puzzles that conventional archaeology struggles to resolve. Each of its approximately 2.5 million stone blocks was cut, transported, and placed with tolerances measured in fractions of inches. The largest blocks weigh over 70 tons, yet they were somehow lifted hundreds of feet into the air and positioned with mechanical precision that seems impossible for a Bronze Age civilization working with copper tools and hemp ropes. Recent discoveries have only deepened the mystery. Ground-penetrating radar and cosmic ray imaging have revealed hidden chambers within the Great Pyramid, spaces that appear to serve no obvious purpose in a burial monument. Some researchers suggest these chambers might have had technical functions, perhaps related to the unusual acoustic properties that caused the pyramid to resonate at specific frequencies when struck. The Egyptians themselves never claimed to have built the pyramids through human ingenuity alone. Their texts consistently attribute these monuments to divine guidance or direct divine construction. The pyramid texts, among the oldest religious writings in the world, describe the pharaoh's journey to join the imperishable stars, but they do so in language that sometimes sounds less like spiritual metaphor and more like technical instruction for some form of celestial travel. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Egyptian divine kingship lies in the physical representations of their gods. Unlike many mythological systems where deities are portrayed as purely human, Egyptian gods often display elongated skulls, unusual proportions, and hybrid features that combine human and animal characteristics. Some scholars interpret these as symbolic representations of divine attributes, but others wonder if they might reflect actual physical differences between the ruling gods and their human subjects. The pharaohs themselves as divine kings were often depicted with these same elongated features. Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who temporarily revolutionized Egyptian religion, was portrayed with such unusual physical characteristics that some researchers have speculated about genetic anomalies or even non-human ancestry. His queen, Nefertiti, and their daughters were shown with similarly elongated skulls and distinctive features that seem to echo the artistic conventions used for the gods themselves. This pattern extends beyond royal portraiture. Actual mummified remains of certain pharaohs show cranial modifications and unusual bone structure that don't match typical human anatomy. While mainstream Egyptology explains these as the results of deliberate cranial binding or artistic convention, the persistence of these features across centuries of royal burials suggests something more systematic than fashion or ritual modification. The Egyptian priesthood maintained that their knowledge of medicine, mathematics, engineering, and astronomy came directly from Thoth and other divine teachers. They preserved this wisdom in temple libraries and mystery schools, passing it down through carefully selected initiates who swore oaths of secrecy. Much of this knowledge was lost when the temples were destroyed and the priesthood scattered, but fragments survived in the works of classical philosophers who traveled to Egypt to study with these ancient keepers of wisdom. The Greeks, who conquered Egypt under Alexander, were amazed by the depth and sophistication of Egyptian learning. Pythagoras, Plato, and other foundational figures of Western philosophy spent years studying in Egyptian temples, learning mathematical and philosophical concepts that they would later introduce to the Greek world. They consistently credited the Egyptians with possessing wisdom of incredible antiquity, knowledge that seemed to come from sources beyond human discovery. But like the Anunnaki of Mesopotamia, the divine rulers of Egypt didn't remain forever. Egyptian tradition speaks of a great departure, a time when the gods withdrew from direct rule and retreated to the Duat, the celestial realm of the dead. The pharaohs who followed were considered divine not because they were gods themselves, but because they carried the blood of the departed gods and served as intermediaries between the human world and the divine realm. This withdrawal wasn't portrayed as abandonment, but as a transition. The gods had established the foundation of Egyptian civilization, provided the knowledge necessary for its continuation, and then stepped back to allow humanity to govern itself while maintaining connection through ritual and divine kingship. The pharaoh became both a human ruler and a living link to the departed gods, a bridge between two worlds. The timing of this divine departure, according to Egyptian chronology, coincides roughly with similar transitions recorded in other ancient civilizations. The Mesopotamians spoke of the end of the direct rule of the Anunnaki after the Great Flood. The Hindu texts describe the end of ages, when gods walked openly among humans. The pattern suggests not isolated mythological development, but a shared memory of a global transition, a time when divine beings who had governed directly chose to withdraw and leave humanity to find its own path forward. This withdrawal also coincides with changes in the archaeological record. The most sophisticated achievements of ancient Egyptian civilization, the Great Pyramids, the precision astronomy, the advanced medical knowledge, all appear earliest in their history, then gradually decline over subsequent dynasties. It's as if the civilization began at its peak and slowly forgot the knowledge that had been given to it, rather than developing these capabilities through gradual advancement. The implications of the Egyptian records, when considered alongside the Sumerian tablets, begin to form a coherent picture. Two separate civilizations, developing independently along different rivers, preserved remarkably similar memories of divine rule, extraordinary longevity among early rulers, advanced knowledge given by gods rather than discovered by humans, and a transition from divine to human governance that marked the beginning of recorded history as we understand it. Neither civilization portrayed this transition as mythology or allegory. Both treated it as historical fact, carefully preserving names, dates, and sequences of events across thousands of years of cultural continuity. The consistency of these accounts, their integration with sophisticated astronomical and mathematical knowledge, and their correlation with archaeological anomalies, suggest we may be dealing with historical memories rather than religious fiction. As we prepare to journey next into the ancient civilizations of India, where similar accounts of divine intervention and cosmic cycles await our examination, we must consider whether the pattern we're seeing represents coincidence or memory. The Vedic texts of ancient India, with their detailed descriptions of flying vehicles and weapons of mass destruction, will add another layer to this growing body of evidence that our ancestors may have known more about their own history than we've been willing to credit. The question becomes not whether ancient peoples were capable of such sophisticated record-keeping, but whether we're prepared to seriously consider what those records might be telling us about the true origins of human civilization and our relationship with beings whose capabilities exceeded anything we attribute to ancient humans. The sacred texts of ancient India present us with accounts so detailed and technically precise that they challenge every assumption we hold about the capabilities of early civilizations. In the sprawling epics of the Mahabharata and Ramayana, in the ancient Vedic hymns, and in the carefully preserved oral traditions that predate written history, we find descriptions of technologies, weapons and flying machines that sound less like religious mythology and more like technical manuals from an advanced civilization. These aren't vague poetic metaphors or symbolic representations of natural phenomena. The Sanskrit texts describe with startling specificity flying vehicles called vimanas, complete with details about their construction, operation, and various types. The Vaimanika Shastra, though its authenticity remains debated, provides what reads like an ancient engineering manual, describing different classes of aircraft, their propulsion systems, and the training required for their pilots. But it's in the Great War described in the Mahabharata where we encounter something truly extraordinary. This epic, one of the longest poems ever written, describes conflicts fought with weapons that display characteristics remarkably similar to modern nuclear armaments. The Brahmastra, described as blazing with the light of 10,000 suns, leaves behind devastation that renders the land barren for generations. Survivors lose their hair and nails, their skin burns from within, and the very water becomes poisoned and undrinkable. When we read these descriptions today, with our knowledge of radiation sickness and nuclear fallout, the parallels become impossible to ignore. The ancient texts describe mushroom-shaped clouds, devastating heat that melts stone, and lingering contamination that makes entire regions uninhabitable. These aren't the kinds of details one would expect from primitive peoples describing natural disasters or conventional warfare. They read like eyewitness accounts of atomic devastation. The archaeological evidence from the Indus Valley adds another layer to this mystery. At Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, we find the remains of sophisticated cities with advanced urban planning, elaborate drainage systems, and standardized weights and measures that suggest a level of organization typically associated with much later civilizations. But perhaps most intriguingly, we also find evidence of sudden, catastrophic destruction. At Mohenjo-daro, skeletons have been discovered lying in the streets as if people were struck down instantly while going about their daily lives. Some areas of the site show signs of intense heat that fuse sand into glass, a phenomenon that requires temperatures far exceeding those produced by conventional fires. Radiation levels at certain locations have been measured at significantly higher than normal background levels. Though these findings remain controversial and hotly debated, the timing is significant. These Indus Valley cities flourished around the same period when other civilizations were supposedly just learning to work bronze and build simple settlements. Yet here we have evidence of urban planning that wouldn't be seen again until the Roman Empire, sanitation systems that rival modern infrastructure, and mysterious signs of destruction that seem to echo the devastating wars described in the Sanskrit epics. The Hindu tradition speaks not just of advanced technology, but of beings who possessed it. The Devas and Asuras, often translated as gods and demons, are described in the earliest texts not as supernatural entities, but as two factions of advanced beings engaged in cosmic warfare. The Devas, associated with light and order, fought against the Asuras, portrayed as proud and rebellious, in conflicts that raged across both earth and sky. These weren't moral absolutes of good versus evil, but political conflicts between rival groups of powerful beings. The earliest Vedic hymns describe both factions as luminous, intelligent, and capable of feats that seemed godlike to human observers. Only in later interpretations did the Asuras become demonized, transformed from defeated rivals into embodiments of evil. The beings described in these texts possessed lifespans measured in thousands of years, wielded weapons of incredible destruction, and traveled in flying vehicles that could move between earth and celestial realms. They established dynasties, taught humans various arts and sciences, and occasionally took human wives, producing hybrid offspring who inherited some of their extraordinary capabilities. This pattern of divine-human interaction, of advanced beings sharing knowledge with primitive humans, appears consistently across ancient Indian literature. The god Vishnu incarnates repeatedly to restore balance when civilization falls into decline. Shiva appears as a teacher of yoga and meditation. Brahma is credited with establishing the laws of society and the principles of architecture and engineering. But perhaps most significantly, these texts describe cycles of time far grander than anything in Western thought. The Hindu concept of yugas speaks of vast ages lasting hundreds of thousands of years, with humanity rising and falling through successive epochs of enlightenment and darkness. We currently live, according to this system, in the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, having fallen from heights of knowledge and spiritual development that characterized earlier ages. This cyclical view of history suggests that advanced civilizations have risen and fallen multiple times throughout human history, with each cycle preserving only fragments of the knowledge possessed by its predecessors. The detailed descriptions of advanced technology in the Sanskrit texts might then represent not imagination or prophecy, but memory, recollections of capabilities that humanity once possessed, but has since lost. The mathematical and astronomical knowledge preserved in ancient Indian texts supports this possibility. The concept of zero, the decimal system, trigonometric functions, and precise calculations of planetary movements all appear in Sanskrit texts that predate their supposed invention in other cultures by centuries or millennia. The ancient Indians calculated the speed of light, understood the spherical nature of the Earth, and possessed astronomical data of startling accuracy. This knowledge wasn't presented as recent discoveries, but as ancient wisdom passed down from the gods themselves. The texts consistently attribute human learning to divine teachers who descended from celestial realms to instruct humanity in the arts of civilization. The pattern mirrors exactly what we find in Mesopotamian and Egyptian sources, suggesting a global phenomenon rather than isolated cultural development. The descriptions of vimanas in ancient Sanskrit literature deserve particular attention for their technical specificity. These aren't simple flying chariots or magical carpets, but sophisticated machines with detailed operational requirements. Different types of vimanas are described for different purposes, some for travel within the Earth's atmosphere, others capable of interplanetary flight, still others designed specifically for warfare. The texts describe navigation systems, fuel requirements, and even the physical effects of high-speed flight on pilots and passengers. They mention the need for protective clothing during certain types of flights and describe the training regimens required for Vimana operators. This level of technical detail suggests familiarity with actual flying machines rather than purely imaginative speculation. Archaeological discoveries continue to add credibility to these ancient accounts. At various sites across India, researchers have found artifacts that don't fit conventional timelines for technological development. Iron pillars that resist corrosion, stone carvings that appear to show modern machinery, and metallurgical techniques that produce alloys we're only now learning to duplicate. The famous Iron Pillar of Delhi, dating to at least the 4th century CE, shows no signs of rust, despite being exposed to the elements for over 1,500 years. Analysis reveals it was made using techniques that weren't supposedly developed until the modern industrial age. The pillar stands as a silent testament to knowledge that seems to have been lost and only recently rediscovered. In cave temples throughout India, we find stone carvings that depict what appear to be mechanical devices, flying vehicles, and figures wearing what looks suspiciously like modern protective equipment or spacesuits. These aren't crude primitive art, but sophisticated sculptures created by master craftsmen who clearly understood the details of what they were portraying. The consistency of these accounts across thousands of years of Indian literature, their correlation with archaeological anomalies, and their remarkable similarity to descriptions of advanced technology and divine beings found in other ancient civilizations all point toward the same unsettling possibility, that our ancestors weren't primitive peoples creating elaborate fantasies, but witnesses to events and technologies that we're only now beginning to understand. The Hindu tradition, like those of Mesopotamia and Egypt, speaks of a great departure, a time when the gods withdrew from direct involvement in human affairs. The Mahabharata describes this transition as the end of the Dvapara Yuga and the beginning of our current age of darkness. The advanced beings who had walked openly among humans retreated to celestial realms, taking with them much of the knowledge they had shared. This withdrawal wasn't portrayed as abandonment, but as a natural progression in the cosmic cycle. Humanity was left to govern itself, to rediscover what wisdom it could, and to prepare for the eventual return of divine guidance in future ages. The pattern matches precisely what we find in other ancient traditions, suggesting not independent mythological development, but shared memory of actual historical events. As we prepare to journey across the Pacific to examine the mysterious civilizations of ancient America, where we'll encounter similar accounts of divine teachers and advanced technologies, the evidence continues to mount that our understanding of human history may be fundamentally incomplete. The Sanskrit texts of India, with their detailed descriptions of flying machines and weapons of mass destruction, their precise astronomical calculations and sophisticated philosophy, challenge us to consider whether ancient peoples possessed knowledge that we've only recently begun to recover. The implications extend far beyond academic curiosity. If these accounts represent historical memory rather than religious mythology, then our entire understanding of human development, our relationship with advanced beings, and our place in cosmic cycles of rise and decline may need to be radically reconsidered. The ancient texts don't present these capabilities as supernatural miracles, but as natural technologies possessed by beings whose understanding exceeded that of ordinary humans. The question we must confront is whether we're prepared to take seriously the possibility that our ancestors knew more about their own history than we've been willing to credit, and whether the gods they described with such consistent detail across cultures and continents might have been something more than figments of primitive imagination. The vast Pacific Ocean, which we think of today as an insurmountable barrier between continents, once witnessed the rise of civilizations that preserved memories as ancient and mysterious as any we've encountered. Across the waters, in the misty highlands of the Andes and the jungle-covered pyramids of Mesoamerica, indigenous peoples maintained oral traditions and carved monuments that speak of the same phenomenon we've been tracing. Divine beings who descended from the heavens, established civilization, and departed with promises of return. In the high mountains of Peru, where the air grows thin and the stars shine with crystalline clarity, the Inca spoke of Viracocha, the creator god who emerged from the sacred waters of Lake Titicaca. But Viracocha wasn't portrayed as an abstract spiritual force or a symbolic representation of natural phenomena. He was described as a physical being, tall and pale, bearded in a land where facial hair was rare, who walked among the people teaching them agriculture, architecture, and the arts of civilization. The accounts describe Viracocha as possessing knowledge that seemed impossible for the time period. He taught the construction of precisely fitted stone walls using blocks weighing hundreds of tons, showed them astronomical alignments that required understanding of celestial mechanics, and established social systems of remarkable sophistication. When his work was complete, he departed across the Pacific with a promise that he or his descendants would return in times of great need. This pattern of divine teachers arriving from elsewhere, sharing advanced knowledge, and then departing repeats throughout the Americas with striking consistency. In Mexico, the Aztecs spoke of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, described not as a mythical creature, but as a bearded, fair-skinned man who brought the gifts of writing, calendar making, and advanced mathematics. Like Viracocha, Quetzalcoatl was said to have departed across the Eastern Sea, leaving behind a prophecy of return that would tragically influence the Aztec response to Spanish conquistadors centuries later. The Maya, whose understanding of astronomy and mathematics exceeded that of contemporary European civilizations, attributed their knowledge to divine teachers who descended from the stars. Their creation myth, preserved in the Popol Vuh, describes multiple attempts at creating humanity, with earlier versions being destroyed when they proved inadequate or rebellious. Only after several failed experiments did the gods succeed in creating humans from maize, beings capable of proper reverence and service. This account of multiple creation attempts of divine beings experimenting with different materials and methods until achieving success echoes remarkably the Mesopotamian stories of humanity's creation from clay and divine blood. The consistency across cultures separated by vast oceans suggests either remarkable coincidence or shared memory of actual events. The technological achievements of these American civilizations provide physical evidence that supports their claims of divine instruction. At Sacsayhuaman, outside the ancient Inca capital of Cusco, massive stone blocks weighing over 300 tons are fitted together with such precision that a knife blade cannot be inserted between them. The construction required not only the ability to quarry, transport, and lift these enormous stones, but also mathematical understanding of angles, stress distribution, and seismic engineering that shouldn't have existed in pre-Columbian America. The Inca themselves insisted they didn't build these walls. They attributed the construction to an earlier race of giants, or to divine beings who possessed knowledge of stoneworking that surpassed human capabilities. Modern engineering analysis confirms that reproducing such construction today would require advanced machinery and techniques that weren't supposed to exist in the ancient world. Similar mysteries appear throughout Mesoamerica. At Teotihuacan, the vast city that the Aztecs found already abandoned when they arrived in the Valley of Mexico, we find evidence of urban planning and construction that suggests knowledge far beyond what we attribute to ancient peoples. The city's layout mirrors celestial patterns with precision that requires sophisticated astronomical observation and mathematical calculation. Beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent at Teotihuacan, archaeologists have discovered chambers lined with mica, a mineral with unusual electrical and thermal properties, and pools of liquid mercury that serve no obvious ceremonial purpose. The presence of these materials, difficult to obtain and work with using primitive tools, suggests technological applications that we don't fully understand. The Maya calendar system demonstrates mathematical and astronomical knowledge that rivals our own. Their calculations of planetary cycles, eclipse predictions, and understanding of precession show familiarity with celestial mechanics that required not just observation, but sophisticated theoretical understanding. They calculated the length of the solar year to within minutes of our modern measurements, achieved accuracy in tracking Venus that wasn't matched by European astronomy until the Renaissance, and understood mathematical concepts like zero centuries before they appeared in other civilizations. This knowledge wasn't presented as recent human discovery, but as ancient wisdom inherited from the gods. Maya creation texts describe divine teachers descending from the Pleiades constellation to establish civilization on Earth. They speak of flying serpents, celestial vehicles, and beings of light who could travel between worlds. The famous carvings at Palenque show figures that some researchers interpret as depicting ancient astronauts operating what appear to be mechanical devices. The consistency of these accounts across the Americas becomes even more striking when we consider the isolation of these civilizations from Old World cultures. The Maya, Inca, and Aztec had no contact with Mesopotamia, Egypt, or India, yet they preserved remarkably similar stories of divine intervention, advanced knowledge given by gods rather than discovered by humans, and promises of return by departed teachers. The departure of these divine teachers is consistently linked to catastrophic events that seem to mark transitions between ages. The Maya spoke of previous worlds, destroyed by flood, fire, and cosmic upheaval, with only small remnants of humanity surviving each destruction to begin civilization anew. The Hopi of North America describe similar cycles, claiming we currently live in the fourth world, while awaiting the arrival of the fifth, which will be heralded by the appearance of the blue star Kachina. These cyclical views of history, with their emphasis on recurring destructions and renewals, match closely the cosmic cycles described in Hindu texts and the Mesopotamian flood narratives. The global consistency suggests not independent mythological development, but shared memory of actual events that affected the entire planet. The Nazca lines of Peru present perhaps the most enigmatic evidence of advanced knowledge in ancient America. These massive geoglyphs, carved into the desert floor and visible only from the air, stretch across hundreds of square kilometers of barren landscape. The lines include not only geometric patterns and animal figures, but also what appear to be landing strips, straight lines extending for miles across uneven terrain, with precision that challenges modern surveying techniques. The purpose of these lines remains hotly debated, but their scale and precision suggest capabilities that exceed conventional explanations of ancient technology. The fact that many can only be properly viewed from high altitude raises uncomfortable questions about who they were intended to communicate with. Local traditions attribute them to the Viracocha people, descendants of the divine teachers, who possessed the ability to fly and needed markers visible from the sky. Recent archaeological discoveries continue to challenge our understanding of American prehistory. At Monte Alban in Mexico, carved stones depict what appear to be figures in spacesuits or diving gear. In the Amazon rainforest, LiDAR surveys have revealed the remains of massive geometric earthworks and sophisticated urban complexes hidden beneath the jungle canopy for centuries. These discoveries suggest civilizations of far greater complexity and technological capability than previously imagined. The oral traditions of Native American tribes throughout North and South America consistently speak of star people, sky beings, and ancient teachers who came from above. The Lakota describe the star nations, celestial beings who interacted with humans in ancient times. The Hopi maintain detailed prophecies about the return of star people who will herald a new age. These aren't recent New Age interpretations, but ancient traditions preserved through careful oral transmission across generations. The consistency of these accounts across hundreds of distinct tribal cultures, each maintaining their own unique variations while preserving core elements about divine teachers and sky beings, suggests something more significant than coincidental mythological development. The traditions are too specific, too consistent, and too widespread to dismiss as primitive superstition or fantasy. Archaeological evidence from North America adds another layer to this mystery. Ancient copper mining operations in Michigan show evidence of extraction techniques and scale that exceed what we attribute to pre-Columbian peoples. Mysterious stone structures throughout New England display astronomical alignments and construction techniques that seem to require knowledge not possessed by known indigenous cultures. Petroglyphs across the continent depict figures that some researchers interpret as showing ancient astronauts or advanced beings. The Smithsonian Institution's own records from the 19th century include numerous reports of giant skeletal remains discovered throughout North America, often in burial mounds or cave systems. These reports describe bones of individuals 7 to 12 feet tall, sometimes with unusual cranial features or dental characteristics. While mainstream archaeology dismisses these accounts as hoaxes or misidentifications, the consistency and official nature of many reports suggest the possibility that populations of unusual physical characteristics once inhabited the continent. The genetic evidence adds yet another puzzling element. Recent studies of ancient DNA from pre-Columbian populations show unexpected genetic markers that don't fit standard models of human migration to the Americas. Some lineages appear to have origins that can't be traced to known Asian populations that supposedly provided all Native American ancestry. While these findings are still being investigated and debated, they raise questions about whether the peopling of the Americas was more complex than currently understood. The astronomical alignments found throughout American archaeological sites demonstrate knowledge that required sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. From the Bighorn Medicine Wheel in Wyoming to the Cahokia Mounds in Illinois, ancient sites show precise alignments with solstices, equinoxes, and stellar positions that require not just observation, but theoretical understanding of astronomical principles. These alignments aren't simple calendar markers, but complex astronomical computers built from earth and stone. They demonstrate understanding of precession, the ability to predict celestial events across long time periods, and knowledge of stellar movements that shouldn't have been available to cultures without advanced mathematical and observational techniques. The pyramid structures found throughout the Americas show remarkable similarities to those in Egypt and other Old World civilizations, despite supposed lack of contact between these cultures. The step pyramids of Central America, the platform mounds of North America, and the recently discovered pyramids of the Amazon all share design principles, astronomical alignments, and construction techniques that suggest shared knowledge or common instruction. The question becomes increasingly difficult to avoid. How did isolated civilizations across the Americas develop such similar astronomical knowledge, construction techniques, and mythological frameworks without contact with each other or with Old World cultures? The conventional explanation of independent invention becomes less plausible as the similarities multiply and the sophistication of the knowledge increases. The departure of the divine teachers in American traditions is consistently linked to human failure or corruption. Quetzalcoatl left in shame after being tricked into drunkenness and inappropriate behavior. Viracocha departed when humans failed to show proper reverence. The pattern suggests that the relationship between divine teachers and humanity was conditional, dependent on human behavior and spiritual development. This conditional relationship, with its emphasis on moral and spiritual requirements, appears throughout global traditions of divine-human interaction. The Mesopotamian flood was sent because humanity had become too noisy and disrespectful. The Hindu cycles describe spiritual decline leading to cosmic destruction and renewal. The pattern suggests that contact with advanced beings wasn't simply technological sharing, but involved spiritual and moral dimensions that affected the stability of the relationship. As we prepare to examine the final pieces of this global puzzle, including the consistent worldwide traditions of great floods, the mysterious megalithic structures that appear on every continent, and the persistent human memory of giants and sky beings, the evidence continues to mount that our ancestors preserved accurate historical memories, rather than creating elaborate mythologies. The civilizations of ancient America, with their impossible stone constructions, their advanced astronomical knowledge, their consistent traditions of divine teachers, and their careful preservation of cyclical history, add their voices to a global chorus that seems to be telling the same story. That humanity once lived under the direct guidance of beings whose capabilities far exceeded those of primitive humans, and that our current civilization represents not the first flowering of human achievement, but the latest attempt to rebuild what was lost when those teachers departed. The threads we've been following across continents and millennia converge in patterns too precise to dismiss as coincidence. From the windswept plains of ancient Britain to the remote islands of the Pacific, from the frozen tundra of Siberia to the sun-baked deserts of Australia, we find the same haunting consistency. Massive stones arranged with mathematical precision, aligned to capture the movements of celestial bodies, built by peoples who, according to conventional history, possessed neither the tools nor the knowledge to create such monuments. At Stonehenge, on England's Salisbury Plain, trilithons weighing over 40 tons stand in perfect astronomical alignment, their construction requiring not just brute force but sophisticated understanding of geometry, astronomy, and engineering principles that weren't supposed to exist in Neolithic Britain. The precision is staggering. The The heel stone marks the exact point where the sun rises on the summer solstice, creating a cathedral of light that has functioned without fail for over 4,000 years. But Stonehenge represents just one note in a global symphony of megalithic construction. At Carnac in Brittany, over 3,000 standing stones march across the landscape in perfectly straight lines that extend for kilometers. In Malta, temples built from blocks weighing up to 20 tons predate both Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids, their sophisticated architecture incorporating acoustic properties that amplify sound in specific ways, as if designed for purposes we no longer understand. The engineering challenges presented by these monuments become more staggering when we consider the tools supposedly available to their builders. Moving 20-ton blocks using only wooden rollers, hemp ropes, and human muscle power stretches credibility. Lifting them into precise vertical positions without modern machinery seems nearly impossible. Yet somehow, these achievements were accomplished not once, but thousands of times across the globe, by peoples who had never been in contact with each other. The astronomical knowledge embedded in these structures reveals understanding that should have required centuries of careful observation to develop. The builders of Newgrange in Ireland created a passage tomb that captures the winter solstice sunrise with pinpoint accuracy, illuminating an inner chamber for exactly 17 minutes each year. This feat required not just knowledge of the sun's position on that specific day, but understanding of how that position changes over decades due to the precession of Earth's axis. At Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, we encounter perhaps the most challenging example of ancient megalithic construction. Built over 11,000 years ago by hunter-gatherers who weren't supposed to possess sophisticated tools or social organization, the site features massive T-shaped pillars arranged in circles, some weighing up to 16 tons. The pillars are decorated with intricate carvings of animals and abstract symbols that suggest symbolic thinking of remarkable sophistication for such an early period. The dating of Göbekli Tepe has forced archaeologists to reconsider fundamental assumptions about the development of human civilization. The site predates agriculture, written language, and the invention of metal tools, yet demonstrates engineering and artistic capabilities that rival much later achievements. The builders quarried, carved, transported, and erected these massive stones using techniques that remain mysterious even today. What makes Göbekli Tepe even more intriguing is its deliberate burial around 8,000 years ago. Whoever created this magnificent site made the conscious decision to cover it completely with tons of earth, preserving it for future discovery. This wasn't gradual abandonment or natural burial by sediment, but intentional concealment, as if the builders wanted to hide their achievement from later generations, or preserve it for rediscovery at some future time. The global distribution of megalithic sites follows patterns that suggest coordination rather than coincidence. Sites on different continents often share similar design principles, astronomical alignments, and construction techniques despite having no known historical contact. The dolmens of Korea echo the passage graves of Western Europe. The stone circles of the British Isles mirror arrangements found in the mountains of Armenia. The precision-cut stones of Peru match techniques used in monuments scattered across the Mediterranean. This consistency extends beyond mere construction methods to include specific astronomical knowledge. Megalithic sites worldwide show understanding of the same celestial cycles, the same mathematical relationships, the same geometric principles. The builders of these monuments possessed a shared body of knowledge that transcended cultural and geographical boundaries, suggesting either contact between widely separated peoples or instruction from a common source. The mathematical relationships embedded in these structures reveal knowledge that wasn't officially discovered until much later in human history. The golden ratio appears in the proportions of megalithic temples thousands of years before it was formally described by Greek mathematicians. The builders of ancient monuments understood pi, used precise geometric relationships, and incorporated complex astronomical calculations into their designs, with accuracy that rivals modern achievements. Local folklore surrounding these sites consistently attributes their construction to giants, gods, or supernatural beings. In Britain, Stonehenge was said to have been built by Merlin with the help of giants who transported the stones from Ireland. In Malta, the megalithic temples were attributed to a race of giants who lived on the islands before humans arrived. In Peru, the massive stone walls were said to have been built by the children of the gods, beings of extraordinary size and strength who could move stones through the power of song. These folklore traditions, dismissed by mainstream archaeology as primitive attempts to explain impressive ruins, show remarkable consistency across cultures that had no contact with each other. The attribution of megalithic construction to beings of extraordinary capabilities appears worldwide, suggesting that these traditions might preserve actual memories rather than invented explanations. Recent archaeological discoveries continue to challenge conventional timelines and explanations for megalithic construction. Ground-penetrating radar and other advanced survey techniques have revealed that many sites are far more extensive than previously known. Stonehenge, for example, sits at the center of a vast landscape of buried monuments, underground chambers, and aligned features that extend for miles in every direction. At Baalbek in Lebanon, the mystery deepens further. The Roman temple complex sits atop a platform made of stones so massive they dwarf even the impressive blocks used in the visible structures. The trilithon consists of 3 stones weighing approximately 800 tons each, fitted together with such precision that the joints remain tight after 2,000 years. Nearby lies the stone of the pregnant woman, a single block estimated at over 1,000 tons that was quarried but never moved to its intended position. Modern engineering analysis suggests that moving the trilithon stones would challenge even contemporary heavy lifting equipment. The precision with which they were placed, the tight tolerances of their joints, and the stability they've maintained for millennia indicate engineering capabilities that seem anachronistic for any ancient civilization. Yet there they stand, silent testimony to knowledge and capabilities that don't fit our understanding of ancient technology. The acoustic properties of many megalithic sites add another layer of mystery. Structures worldwide demonstrate sophisticated understanding of sound dynamics, with chambers designed to amplify specific frequencies, create echo effects, or produce resonance phenomena. The hypogeum in Malta generates sound effects so complex that modern acoustical engineers struggle to understand how they were achieved, using only stone tools. These acoustic features weren't accidental byproducts of construction, but deliberate design elements incorporated into the monument's architecture. Some researchers suggest they were intended for ceremonial purposes, enhancing the effects of chanting or music during rituals. Others wonder if they served more technical functions, perhaps related to properties of sound that ancient builders understood but that we're only beginning to rediscover. The quarrying techniques used to create megalithic blocks present puzzles that conventional archaeology struggles to address. Many sites show evidence of precision cutting that required tools capable of slicing through the hardest stone with accuracy measured in fractions of inches. The surfaces are smooth, the angles precise, and the tolerances tight enough that modern stone-cutting equipment would be required to achieve similar results. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, stone blocks show evidence of machine-like precision that challenges every assumption about ancient technology. The surfaces are flat to within thousandths of an inch, the angles are geometrically perfect, and complex 3-dimensional shapes are cut with accuracy that would require computer-controlled machinery today. The hardness of the stone makes such precision even more remarkable, as the material is difficult to work even with modern tools. The transportation methods used to move these massive blocks remain equally mysterious. Many sites are located far from their quarries, requiring the movement of multi-ton stones across difficult terrain. The builders of Easter Island somehow transported massive moai statues across the island and erected them on ceremonial platforms. The creators of Stonehenge brought blue stones from Wales, over 200 kilometers away, then positioned them with astronomical precision. Traditional explanations involving wooden rollers Earthen ramps and massive human labor forces become less convincing when applied to the largest megalithic constructions. The logistics of moving 1,000-ton blocks using primitive techniques would require organizational capabilities and workforce sizes that seem disproportionate to the supposed capabilities of ancient societies. The alignment patterns found in megalithic sites worldwide demonstrate understanding of celestial mechanics that required not just observation, but theoretical knowledge of astronomical principles. Many sites track not just simple solar and lunar cycles, but complex phenomena like the precession of the equinoxes, which takes over 26,000 years to complete one full cycle. This suggests that the builders either maintained observational records across thousands of generations or possessed theoretical knowledge that allowed them to calculate these long-term cycles without directly observing them. Either possibility challenges conventional understanding of ancient capabilities and suggests access to sophisticated knowledge that seems anachronistic for the periods when these monuments were constructed. The global nature of megalithic construction, its consistent techniques and astronomical knowledge, its attribution to superhuman builders in folklore traditions, and its challenges to conventional archaeology all point toward the same uncomfortable conclusion: that our understanding of ancient human capabilities may be fundamentally incomplete. These monuments stand as silent witnesses to knowledge and abilities that don't fit our models of gradual human development. They suggest contact with sources of advanced understanding, whether through cultural transmission from lost civilizations, instruction by beings with capabilities exceeding those of primitive humans, or access to knowledge that has since been forgotten or deliberately concealed. As we prepare to examine the final convergence of evidence in our investigation, including the consistent global traditions of catastrophic floods, the persistent worldwide memory of giant beings, and the recurring theme of divine departure with promises of return, the megalithic monuments add their stone testimony to a growing body of evidence that humanity's past may be far stranger and more complex than official history acknowledges. These massive stones, precisely cut and positioned with astronomical accuracy by peoples who supposedly lacked the necessary tools and knowledge, stand as permanent questions carved into the landscape itself. They ask us to reconsider not just our understanding of ancient capabilities, but our willingness to seriously examine evidence that challenges fundamental assumptions about human development and our relationship with sources of advanced knowledge that may have shaped our earliest civilizations. The monuments endure while empires rise and fall, their silent presence a constant reminder that the past holds mysteries we have yet to solve and knowledge we have yet to recover. They speak in the language of stone and star, geometry and alignment, challenging us to expand our understanding of what ancient peoples knew and how they came to know it. The threads of evidence we've been following through ancient texts and megalithic monuments find perhaps their most dramatic convergence in a memory that haunts nearly every culture on Earth. It's a memory so universal, so persistent, and so detailed that it transcends the boundaries of geography, language, and time itself. From the reed boats floating on Mesopotamian marshes to the canoes navigating Polynesian atolls, from the highland villages of the Andes to the steppes of Central Asia, humanity remembers the same catastrophic event, a great flood that swept away the world that came before. But these aren't simply stories about rising waters or seasonal flooding. They're accounts of global catastrophe, of divine judgment, of the deliberate erasure of entire civilizations. And woven through these flood narratives, we find the same disturbing elements that have appeared throughout our investigation. Advanced beings making difficult decisions, hybrid populations that had to be eliminated, and the careful preservation of knowledge and bloodlines that would allow civilization to begin again. The Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh preserves perhaps the most detailed account of this catastrophe. In the story of Utnapishtim, we encounter not just flooding, but systematic destruction orchestrated by the gods themselves. Enlil, the stern god of authority, decrees that humanity must be wiped out entirely, but Ea, the god of wisdom and water, secretly warns Utnapishtim to build a massive vessel and preserve the seeds of life through the coming devastation. The description of the flood itself is harrowing in its visceral detail. The text speaks of darkness covering the land, of waters that rose to the level of the mountains, of storms so violent that even the gods cowered in fear of what they had unleashed. When the waters finally receded, Utnapishtim emerged to find a world scoured clean, corpses floating like driftwood on the subsiding tide. What makes this account particularly significant is its matter-of-fact tone. This isn't presented as allegory or moral instruction, but as historical record. The text provides specific measurements for the ark, detailed instructions for its construction, and precise timing for the duration of the flood. It reads like a technical manual for surviving global catastrophe, preserved by people who believed such knowledge might be needed again. The Hebrew account in Genesis echoes these details with startling precision, but adds crucial context about why the flood was necessary. The text speaks of the Nephilim, the offspring of divine beings and human women whose corruption had spread throughout the earth. The flood wasn't random divine wrath, but targeted elimination of hybrid populations that had upset the natural order of creation. This theme of corrupted bloodlines requiring elimination appears in flood traditions worldwide. The Hindu Puranas describe periodic destructions that cleanse the earth of beings who have strayed too far from their intended nature. The Hopi speak of previous worlds destroyed when humanity forgot its proper relationship with the forces that created it. The pattern suggests not natural disaster, but deliberate intervention to reset the biological and spiritual balance of the planet. The global distribution of these flood memories raises profound questions about their origin. Cultures separated by vast oceans, with no possibility of historical contact, preserve remarkably similar details: a divine warning given to a chosen survivor, instructions for building a vessel to preserve life, the release of birds to test for dry land, the establishment of covenants ensuring such destruction won't happen again. The consistency extends even to seemingly minor details. Both Mesopotamian and Hebrew accounts describe the survivor offering sacrifices after emerging from the ark, with the gods or god being pleased by the aroma of the offerings. The Aztec flood myth includes similar details about survivors making offerings to ensure the world's renewal. These aren't the kinds of details that would arise independently in separate cultures unless they were preserving memories of actual events. Geological evidence adds another layer to this mystery. The end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, was marked by catastrophic flooding on a scale that dwarfs anything in recorded history. As massive ice sheets melted, sea levels rose by over 400 feet, drowning vast coastal plains where early civilizations might have flourished. The flooding wasn't gradual, but occurred in sudden, devastating pulses as ice dams failed and glacial lakes emptied into the oceans. The channeled scablands of Washington state bear witness to one such event, where the failure of an ice dam released a volume of water equivalent to 10 times the flow of all current rivers combined. The landscape was carved into its present form in a matter of days, leaving behind evidence of water moving at speeds and volumes that challenge comprehension. Similar catastrophic flooding occurred worldwide. The Black Sea appears to have been a much smaller freshwater lake, until a breach in the Bosphorus sent Mediterranean waters cascading in, raising the lake level by hundreds of feet and drowning settlements around its shores. The English Channel was carved when rising waters broke through the chalk ridge connecting Britain to continental Europe. The Persian Gulf was completely dry land until rising seas flooded the river valleys that would become the Tigris and Euphrates. These weren't gradual changes that early humans could adapt to over generations. They were catastrophic events that would have swept away entire civilizations in a matter of days or weeks. Survivors would have witnessed their entire world disappearing beneath the waves, an experience so traumatic it would be preserved in cultural memory for millennia. But the flood traditions speak of more than just natural catastrophe. They consistently describe the event as judgment, as the result of divine displeasure with the direction humanity had taken. The Book of Enoch is explicit about this, describing the flood as necessary to eliminate the Nephilim, the giant offspring of fallen angels who had corrupted the earth with their violence and arrogance. The Mesopotamian texts echo this theme, describing humanity as having become too numerous, too noisy, too disruptive of divine order. The flood wasn't punishment for moral failings in the modern sense, but correction of a biological and spiritual experiment that had gone wrong. The preserved survivors weren't chosen for their righteousness alone, but for their genetic purity, their maintenance of original human characteristics, uncorrupted by hybridization with other beings. This selective preservation appears in flood traditions worldwide. Noah's family represented pure human bloodlines. Utnapishtim was chosen for his wisdom and loyalty to the gods. The survivors in Hindu traditions were selected for their spiritual development and proper understanding of cosmic law. The pattern suggests that the flood wasn't indiscriminate destruction, but careful culling, designed to preserve specific genetic and spiritual lineages. The aftermath of the flood marks a clear transition in human history across multiple cultures. The Sumerian king list shows dramatically shortened lifespans after the deluge. Egyptian chronology speaks of the end of direct divine rule and the beginning of purely mortal dynasties. Hindu texts describe the transition from earlier ages of enlightenment to our current age of darkness and confusion. This transition coincides with changes in the archaeological record that suggest genuine discontinuity in human development. The sophisticated achievements of pre-flood civilizations, represented by sites like Göbekli Tepe, with its precise astronomical alignments and massive stone construction, give way to simpler technologies and smaller-scale social organization. It's as if humanity had to rebuild from fragments, working to recover knowledge that had been largely lost in the catastrophe. The technology described in pre-flood accounts also suggests capabilities that were lost and only slowly recovered. The Mesopotamian texts speak of the Anunnaki possessing flying vehicles and advanced weapons before the flood. The Hindu epics describe vimanas and devastating weapons in the conflicts that preceded the Great Deluge. The Book of Enoch mentions the Watchers teaching metallurgy, astronomy, and other advanced sciences before being bound and imprisoned. After the flood, these technologies disappear from the record. Humanity rebuilds with simpler tools and more limited knowledge, as if starting over from a much lower technological base. The pattern suggests not gradual development, but recovery from a catastrophic loss of advanced capabilities. The genetic evidence adds another puzzling dimension to flood traditions. Recent studies of human DNA show a severe population bottleneck that occurred roughly 12 to 15,000 years ago, precisely when flood traditions placed their catastrophic events. The human population appears to have dropped to perhaps a few thousand individuals before gradually recovering and spreading across the globe. This genetic bottleneck coincides with the extinction of numerous large animal species worldwide, the so-called Pleistocene megafauna extinction that eliminated mammoths, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and dozens of other species. The timing suggests a global catastrophe that affected not just human populations, but entire ecosystems, exactly what we would expect from the kind of worldwide flooding described in ancient traditions. The survivors of this bottleneck appear to have carried genetic markers that spread rapidly across the globe, suggesting a relatively small founder population that gave rise to all subsequent human diversity. This matches the flood narrative's descriptions of small groups of survivors repopulating the Earth after the waters receded. Archaeological evidence from underwater sites adds credibility to flood traditions by revealing submerged settlements and structures that were once above sea level. Off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Mediterranean, divers have discovered architectural remains that appear to be artificial constructions rather than natural formations. These sites suggest that coastal civilizations did indeed exist in areas that are now beneath hundreds of feet of water. The Yonaguni Monument off Japan shows what appear to be carved steps, platforms, and geometric shapes that some researchers interpret as architectural remains. While the interpretation remains controversial, the site demonstrates that areas now underwater were once dry land, where human construction could have occurred. Similar discoveries off the coast of India have revealed what appear to be urban layouts with streets, buildings, and defensive walls now lying beneath the Arabian Sea. These sites match descriptions in Hindu texts of cities that were SW accounts of pre-flood civilizations. The flew allowed by the ocean, lending archaeological support to literary traditions, also preserve technological knowledge that seems anachronistic for the periods when these texts were supposedly composed. The detailed instructions for ark construction in Mesopotamian and Hebrew sources demonstrate understanding of naval architecture, materials science, and preservation techniques that required sophisticated knowledge of engineering principles. The dimensions given for Noah's Ark, when analysed by modern naval architects, proved to be remarkably seaworthy, with proportions that maximise stability and cargo capacity. The specifications aren't arbitrary, but represent optimal design for a vessel intended to survive extreme weather conditions while carrying maximum biological diversity. Similar technical knowledge appears in flood traditions from other cultures. The Maya Popol Vuh describes the construction of vessels using specific materials and techniques. Pacific Island traditions preserve detailed knowledge of navigation and boat building that allowed survivors to cross vast ocean distances. The consistency of this technical knowledge across cultures suggests preservation of actual maritime expertise rather than mythological invention. The flood narratives consistently describe the catastrophe as marking the end of direct divine rule and the beginning of human self-governance. After the waters receded, the gods withdrew to celestial realms, leaving humanity to rebuild civilization with only limited guidance and intervention. This withdrawal pattern matches what we've observed in other ancient traditions and suggests a coordinated transition from one phase of human development to another. The covenants established after the flood, promising that such destruction wouldn't happen again, appear in traditions worldwide. The rainbow becomes a sign of divine restraint in Hebrew tradition. Similar promises appear in Mesopotamian texts and in flood narratives from other cultures. These covenants suggest that the flood wasn't the end of divine involvement, but a reset of the relationship between advanced beings and humanity. The flood traditions also preserve warnings about future cycles of destruction and renewal. Hindu cosmology speaks of recurring ages of decline leading to periodic destructions. The Hopi prophecies describe signs that will herald the end of the current world and the beginning of the fifth. The Book of Revelation envisions a final judgment that will cleanse the earth once again. These prophetic elements suggest that the flood wasn't a unique event, but part of ongoing cycles of rise, corruption, and renewal that govern human development over vast periods of time. The patterns embedded in these traditions warn that humanity's current trajectory may be leading toward another period of judgment and reset. As we approach the culmination of our investigation into whether gods once ruled the earth, the flood traditions provide perhaps the most compelling evidence for a lost chapter in human history. They preserve detailed memories of global catastrophe, of advanced civilizations swept away, of careful genetic and cultural preservation, and of the transition from divine rule to human self-governance. The consistency of these memories across isolated cultures, their correlation with geological and genetic evidence, and their preservation of sophisticated technical knowledge all point toward historical reality rather than mythological invention. The flood narratives suggest that our current civilization isn't humanity's first attempt at complex society, but the latest recovery from catastrophic loss of earlier achievements. The gods of antiquity, according to these traditions, didn't simply abandon humanity, but orchestrated a careful reset designed to preserve the best elements while eliminating the corruptions that had made such drastic action necessary. The flood becomes not random destruction but surgical intervention, a cosmic course correction that allowed human development to continue along more sustainable paths. This interpretation transforms our understanding of human history from a story of gradual progress to one of cyclical rise and decline, with advanced guidance providing both the knowledge for civilization and the wisdom to prevent its complete destruction when correction becomes necessary. The flood traditions preserve not just memory of catastrophe, but hope for renewal and the promise that such guidance remains available when humanity proves ready to receive it again. The memories preserved in flood traditions lead us to perhaps the most unsettling pattern in human mythology, one that appears with such consistency across cultures that it demands our serious attention. Alongside the waters that swept away earlier worlds, ancient peoples remembered something else that was lost: beings of extraordinary size and power who once walked among humans. These weren't simply tall individuals or exaggerated tribal memories, but consistent accounts of a distinct population whose very existence seemed to bridge the gap between the mortal and divine realms. In the Hebrew tradition, these beings are called the Nephilim, described as the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. The text doesn't present them as mythological creatures, but as historical figures whose presence shaped the ancient world. They are called mighty men of old, men of renown, yet their very existence is portrayed as a corruption of the natural order, a violation of boundaries that were meant to remain intact. The Book of Enoch, excluded from the biblical canon, but preserved in Ethiopian churches, provides far more detail about these beings. It describes how 200 watchers, angelic beings assigned to observe humanity, instead chose to intervene directly in human affairs. They took wives from among mortal women, and from these unions came the Nephilim, giants whose appetites and violence eventually consumed the earth itself. According to these accounts, the Nephilim weren't simply large humans, but beings whose hybrid nature gave them capabilities that exceeded both their human mothers and, in some ways, their divine fathers. They possessed immense physical strength, extended lifespans, and knowledge that seemed to come from sources beyond human discovery. Yet they were also portrayed as fundamentally unstable, creatures whose mixed nature made them dangerous to both the human and divine orders. The destruction that followed their proliferation wasn't portrayed as divine cruelty, but as necessary surgery. The earth had become corrupted by beings who didn't fit into the intended patterns of creation. The flood wasn't punishment, but cleansing, a reset that would eliminate these hybrid populations while preserving pure human lineages that could continue developing along their intended paths. This pattern of giant beings disrupting natural order appears with startling consistency across cultures that had no contact with Hebrew tradition. In Greek mythology, the Titans represent a similar concept: primordial beings of enormous power who ruled before the Olympian gods established proper cosmic order. The Gigantomachy describes their wars against the heavens, conflicts that required divine intervention to resolve. The Norse tradition preserves these memories in the Jotnar, often mistranslated simply as giants, but more accurately understood as devourers or forces of elemental chaos. These beings weren't evil in a moral sense, but represented powers that threatened the stability of both divine and human realms. The gods themselves were related to the Jotnar through complex genealogies, suggesting these weren't entirely separate species, but different aspects of the same cosmic family tree. In Hindu tradition, the Asuras fulfill a similar role. Originally described as divine beings equal in power to the Devas, they became associated with pride, rebellion, and disruption of cosmic order. Their conflicts with the gods required divine intervention and eventually led to their banishment from the celestial realms. Yet they too were portrayed not as inherently evil, but as beings whose nature had become incompatible with the harmony of creation. Native American traditions across both continents preserve remarkably similar accounts. The Paiute people of Nevada tell of the Site-Ka, red-haired giants who were enemies of their ancestors. After long wars, the giants were said to have been trapped in caves and destroyed, though some accounts suggest a few may have survived in remote areas. The Lakota speak of giants who once ruled the land before being defeated by the ancestors of current tribes. In South America, Spanish conquistadors recorded numerous accounts from indigenous peoples about encounters with giants in earlier times. The chronicles describe beings of extraordinary height found in coastal regions, some reportedly reaching 12 feet or more in stature. While many dismiss these as exaggerations, the consistency of the reports across different regions and time periods suggests they may preserve memories of actual populations with unusual physical characteristics. Archaeological discoveries have periodically surfaced that seem to support these traditions, though they remain highly controversial. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, newspapers across North America reported the discovery of unusually large skeletal remains, often found in burial mounds or cave systems. These reports described bones of individuals ranging from 7 to 12 feet in height, sometimes with unusual cranial features or dental characteristics that differed from normal human anatomy. The Smithsonian Institution's own archives contain numerous references to such discoveries, though many of the actual specimens seem to have been lost or misplaced over time. Critics argue that these reports were either hoaxes or misidentifications of normal human remains, while supporters suggest there has been deliberate suppression of evidence that doesn't fit accepted models of human development. More recently, discoveries in Peru have revealed elongated skulls with cranial capacities significantly larger than normal humans. While mainstream archaeology explains these as the result of deliberate cranial binding practices, some researchers note that the skulls show structural differences that seem to go beyond what could be achieved through external modification. The volume and shape suggest different underlying bone structure rather than simply deformed normal skulls. Similar discoveries have been made in other parts of the world. In Romania, unusually large skeletal remains have been found that seem to predate known historical populations. In Russia, archaeological sites have yielded bones of individuals whose height would have exceeded normal human ranges by significant margins. While each discovery is disputed and often dismissed, the global pattern suggests something more systematic than random anomalies. The folklore surrounding megalithic construction consistently attributes these monuments to giants, as we've seen in our examination of ancient stone structures. From Stonehenge to the Andes, local traditions maintain that only beings of extraordinary size and strength could have moved and positioned such massive stones. While modern archaeology prefers explanations involving human ingenuity and organization, the persistence of these giant builder traditions across cultures suggests they may preserve actual historical memories. The timing of giant populations in various traditions often coincides with the flood narratives we've already examined. The Nephilim are specifically mentioned as existing before the deluge, with only their spirits surviving the destruction of their physical bodies. This creates an interesting parallel with archaeological evidence suggesting that megafauna, including potentially large human populations, went extinct around the same time as the global flooding that marked the end of the Ice Age. The characteristics attributed to giants in various traditions show remarkable consistency despite geographical separation. They are typically described as possessing not just great size, but advanced knowledge, sophisticated tools, and capabilities that seemed magical to ordinary humans. They are credited with building massive structures, teaching advanced crafts, and possessing lifespans far exceeding normal human limits. Yet they are also consistently portrayed as problematic, beings whose presence disrupted the natural order in ways that required divine intervention. They are described as violent, arrogant, or simply too different from regular humans to coexist peacefully. Their elimination or departure is presented not as tragedy, but as necessary for the continuation of human development. This pattern suggests that the giant traditions may preserve memories of hybrid populations that resulted from interbreeding between humans and beings with different biological characteristics. If the Anunnaki, the Watchers, or similar entities were physical beings with advanced capabilities and extended lifespans, their offspring with human partners might indeed have possessed characteristics that set them apart from both parent populations. Such hybrid beings would have faced unique challenges. Too different from humans to integrate fully into human society, yet lacking the full capabilities of their non-human ancestors, they might have formed separate communities that eventually came into conflict with purely human populations. Their advanced knowledge and physical capabilities could have given them temporary advantages, but their hybrid nature might have made them ultimately unstable as a breeding population. The consistent portrayal of giants as builders and teachers suggests they served as intermediaries between advanced beings and primitive humans. They possessed enough of their non-human heritage to understand advanced technologies and concepts, yet enough human nature to communicate with and instruct human populations. They may have been the primary means by which knowledge of astronomy, metallurgy, architecture, and other sophisticated arts was transmitted to early human civilizations. Their eventual disappearance from the historical record coincides with the transition from direct divine rule to human self-governance that we've observed in multiple traditions. As the advanced beings withdrew from direct involvement in human affairs, their hybrid offspring would have lost their special status and protective relationships. Left to survive on their own capabilities, they may have gradually died out or been absorbed into purely human populations. The persistent folklore memory of giants suggests that their impact on early human development was significant enough to be preserved across millennia of oral tradition. They represent a bridge between the age of direct divine involvement and the beginning of purely human civilization. Their stories serve as reminders of a time when the boundaries between human and divine were more permeable, when beings of mixed nature walk the earth and shape the development of early societies. Recent genetic studies have revealed that modern human DNA contains fragments from at least 2 other hominid species, Neanderthals and Denisovans, showing that hybridization between different types of humans did occur in prehistoric times. While these discoveries don't prove the existence of the giants described in ancient traditions, they demonstrate that human evolution was more complex than previously understood, and that mixed populations were part of our ancestral history. The implications of giant traditions extend beyond simple curiosity about unusual skeletal remains or folklore stories. They suggest that human development occurred in the context of contact with beings whose capabilities exceeded those of ordinary humans. The knowledge and structures attributed to giants may represent the legacy of this contact, achievements that required guidance from sources beyond primitive human capabilities. The cyclical nature of giant stories, their appearance before catastrophic events, and their disappearance during global resets, suggest they may be part of recurring patterns in human development. If advanced beings periodically intervene in human affairs, their offspring or creations might represent transitional populations that bridge different phases of civilization before being removed when their role is complete. As we approach our final examination of the evidence, the giant traditions add another layer to the growing picture of human history as far more complex than conventional archaeology acknowledges. They suggest that our ancestors preserved accurate memories of beings whose existence challenges our understanding of human development and our relationship with sources of advanced knowledge that shaped early civilization. The giants stand as reminders that the boundary between human and divine was once more permeable, that hybrid populations may have played crucial roles in transmitting advanced knowledge, and that the development of human civilization may have occurred under guidance from beings whose capabilities far exceeded those we attribute to primitive humans. Their memory lingers in folklore and tradition, in megalithic monuments attributed to their construction, and in the persistent human sense that we are not the first intelligent beings to have shaped this planet's history. Whether viewed as literal historical figures or as symbols of contact between humans and advanced beings, the giant traditions preserve crucial information about our origins and development that mainstream history has yet to fully acknowledge or understand. The threads we've been following through ancient texts, megalithic monuments, flood traditions, and giant folklore converge on a single, inescapable conclusion. The patterns are too consistent, too widespread, and too detailed to dismiss as coincidence or primitive imagination. From the clay tablets of ancient Sumer to the oral traditions of isolated Pacific islands, from the precision-cut stones of Peru to the astronomical alignments of European megaliths, the evidence points toward the same extraordinary possibility. Our ancestors weren't creating elaborate mythologies to explain natural phenomena or inventing stories to entertain themselves around evening fires. They were preserving the most important historical information they possessed, memories of a time when beings with capabilities far exceeding those of primitive humans walked among them, guided their development, and shaped the foundations of human civilization. The Anunnaki of Mesopotamia, the Neteru of Egypt, the Devas and Asuras of India, the divine teachers of the Americas, all represent the same phenomenon described in the languages and cultural contexts of different peoples. These were physical beings with advanced knowledge, extended lifespans, and technologies that seem magical to human observers. They established the first civilizations, taught the fundamental arts and sciences, and governed directly before withdrawing to allow humanity to continue its development independently. The flood traditions preserve the memory of why this withdrawal became necessary. The interbreeding between these advanced beings and humans had created hybrid populations whose nature threatened the stability of both the human and divine orders. The Nephilim, the giants, the various Titan-like beings of world mythology represent these intermediate populations, powerful and knowledgeable, but ultimately incompatible with the intended patterns of creation. The global catastrophe that swept away these early civilizations wasn't random natural disaster, but deliberate intervention, a cosmic reset that eliminated the unstable hybrid populations while preserving pure human lineages that could rebuild civilization along more sustainable paths. The survivors carried fragments of the advanced knowledge they had been given, which explains why the earliest historical civilizations appeared with their sophisticated capabilities already fully developed, rather than showing gradual technological advancement. The megalithic monuments scattered across the globe represent the most durable legacy of this lost chapter in human history. Built with knowledge and techniques that seem impossible for their supposed time periods, aligned with astronomical precision that required theoretical understanding rather than simple observation, they stand as permanent testimony to capabilities that don't fit our models of ancient human development. These stones speak in the language of mathematics and astronomy, preserving information that was meant to survive even global catastrophes. They may represent not just monuments or temples, but information storage systems, designed to maintain crucial knowledge through periods of civilizational collapse and renewal. Their global distribution and consistent design principles suggest coordination from sources that possessed worldwide reach and long-term planning capabilities. The departure of the divine rulers marked the beginning of recorded history as we understand it, but it wasn't abandonment. The advanced beings established systems of knowledge preservation, bloodline maintenance, and periodic intervention that would allow human civilization to continue developing while preventing the same mistakes that had necessitated the earlier reset. The priest-king systems of ancient civilizations, the mystery schools that preserved esoteric knowledge, the prophetic traditions that warned of cyclical destructions and renewals, all represent mechanisms for maintaining connection with the departed teachers and their wisdom. Human rulers claim divine authority not through delusion, but through actual genetic and spiritual connections to the beings who had once governed directly. This hidden history explains the persistent human sense that we have fallen from a greater height, that knowledge once common has been lost, that we are living in the shadow of achievements we can barely comprehend. The Golden Age myths found in every culture aren't fantasies of primitive peoples, but memories of a time when advanced guidance was directly available and human potential was more fully realized. The implications extend far beyond academic curiosity about ancient mysteries. If this interpretation of human history is accurate, then we are not the first advanced civilization to emerge on this planet, and we may not be the last. The cyclical view of history preserved in ancient traditions suggests that rises and falls of civilization are natural patterns governed by cosmic forces that operate on timescales far longer than individual human lives. The warnings embedded in ancient prophecies take on new significance when viewed as practical guidance from beings who have observed these cycles repeatedly. The emphasis on balance, harmony with natural forces, and spiritual development alongside technological advancement may represent hard-won wisdom about what allows civilizations to survive their own success. The promise of return that appears in traditions worldwide, from Quetzalcoatl to the blue star Kachina to the Second Coming, may represent not mythological hope, but actual cycles of intervention. If advanced beings have guided human development before, they may continue to monitor our progress and intervene when necessary to prevent complete collapse or to guide transitions to higher levels of development. This perspective transforms our understanding of human potential and responsibility. We are not abandoned children struggling alone in an empty universe, but participants in a vast educational process, overseen by beings whose perspective encompasses far longer time periods than our individual lives or even our entire recorded history. The advanced capabilities demonstrated by ancient civilizations, the sophisticated knowledge preserved in their traditions, and the monumental structures they left behind all point toward human potential that far exceeds what we currently manifest. The limitations we accept as natural may be artificial constraints that can be transcended when proper guidance and understanding are available. The genetic bottleneck that appears in human DNA around 12,000 years ago, coinciding with flood traditions and the end of direct divine rule, suggests that our current population represents a carefully selected subset of earlier human diversity. We may carry within our genetic heritage capabilities that are dormant rather than absent, awaiting the proper conditions or guidance for their reactivation. The consistency of ancient accounts describing telepathic communication, extended lifespans, direct perception of spiritual realities, and other capabilities that seem supernatural to us may indicate that these represent normal human potential that has been temporarily suppressed or forgotten rather than permanently lost evolutionary capabilities. The monuments, myths, and memories we've examined throughout this investigation all point toward the same conclusion. The gods of antiquity were not imaginary constructs, but real beings whose influence shaped human development in ways that are still visible today. Their withdrawal wasn't permanent departure, but strategic repositioning, allowing humanity to develop independence while maintaining the capability for renewed guidance when circumstances require it. The evidence suggests that we stand at another crucial point in this vast cycle. The knowledge preserved in ancient traditions, the capabilities demonstrated by vanished civilizations, and the prophetic warnings about current conditions all indicate that major transitions may be approaching. Whether these transitions lead to advancement or collapse may depend on our willingness to acknowledge the fuller scope of human history and our relationship with sources of guidance that transcend individual human limitations. The gods who once ruled the earth may not have departed as completely as conventional history suggests. Their influence may continue through hidden channels, preserved bloodlines, mystery traditions, and direct but unrecognized intervention in human affairs. The question isn't whether they existed, but whether we're prepared to recognize their continuing presence and the implications it carries for our understanding of human potential and cosmic responsibility. As we conclude this investigation into one of the most profound questions in human history, we're left not with final answers, but with an expanded framework for understanding our origins, our capabilities, and our destiny. The evidence we've examined challenges every assumption of conventional history and opens possibilities that are both exhilarating and sobering. The stones still stand, silent witnesses to knowledge we're only beginning to recover. The myths still whisper their warnings and promises across the centuries. The genetic and archaeological evidence continues to accumulate, slowly forcing recognition of patterns that don't fit accepted models. And somewhere, perhaps, the beings who once walked among us as gods continue their patient observation, waiting for humanity to demonstrate that it's ready for the next phase of guidance in the endless cycle of cosmic education. Whether we interpret this evidence as literal historical fact or as profound symbolic truth about human development and potential, its implications remain transformative. We are not alone. We are not the first. And our current limitations are not permanent boundaries, but temporary constraints in a much larger pattern of development that encompasses far more than our individual lives or even our entire recorded civilization. The gods of antiquity may indeed have ruled the earth, and their legacy continues to shape our world in ways we're only beginning to understand. The question that emerges from all this evidence is perhaps more unsettling than any we've yet considered. If these beings were real, if they possessed the advanced capabilities described in ancient texts, if they could manipulate genetics, build monuments that challenge modern engineering, and govern civilizations for thousands of years, then where did they go? And perhaps more importantly, are they truly gone? The departure narratives found across cultures speak not of death or destruction of these divine rulers, but of withdrawal, a strategic retreat from direct governance, a stepping back from immediate involvement in human affairs. The Mesopotamian texts describe the Anunnaki returning to the heavens or retreating to hidden realms beneath the earth. Egyptian tradition speaks of the gods withdrawing to the Duat, maintaining presence but no longer ruling directly from earthly thrones. This pattern of withdrawal rather than disappearance appears with such consistency that it demands our attention. These weren't beings who simply vanished or died out, but entities who made conscious decisions to reduce their visible presence while maintaining some level of influence or observation. The transition from direct rule to indirect guidance suggests not abandonment, but evolution of relationship. Consider the implications of this withdrawal pattern. If beings with lifespans measured in thousands of years, with advanced technology and deep understanding of cosmic cycles, chose to step back from direct governance around 12,000 years ago, they would still be alive today. Their perspective would encompass the entire arc of recorded human history as a brief moment in their extended existence. From such a vantage point, the rise and fall of empires, the development of technologies, the spiritual evolution of humanity would all be visible as part of larger patterns. These beings would have observed the Egyptian dynasties, the Greek philosophers, the Roman Empire, the medieval period, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, and our current technological age as consecutive chapters in a single ongoing story. The ancient texts consistently describe these beings as possessing deep knowledge of time cycles, astronomical patterns, and the natural laws governing planetary development. If such knowledge is real, then their withdrawal 12,000 years ago may have been timed to coincide with natural cycles that they understood far better than early humans could. They may have recognized that direct governance was no longer appropriate for the next phase of human development. The mystery schools and esoteric traditions that emerged after the departure of direct divine rule may represent the mechanism by which these beings maintained influence without visible presence. The Egyptian priesthood, the Mesopotamian temple hierarchies, the Vedic traditions of India all preserved knowledge and practices that seem to come from sources beyond ordinary human discovery. These traditions maintained remarkably consistent core teachings, despite geographical separation and cultural differences. The emphasis on cosmic cycles, the understanding of humanity's place in larger patterns of development, the techniques for accessing higher states of consciousness, all suggest connection to sources of knowledge that transcended individual human lifespans and cultural boundaries. The initiatory nature of these traditions, with their carefully guarded secrets and progressive levels of revelation, mirrors exactly what we might expect if advanced beings were maintaining indirect guidance through selected human intermediaries. Knowledge would be preserved and transmitted, but only to those who demonstrated the wisdom and responsibility necessary to use it properly. Archaeological discoveries continue to reveal evidence of technologies and capabilities that seem anachronistic for their supposed time periods. The precision of ancient stone cutting, the sophistication of early astronomical observations, the advanced metallurgy found in ancient sites, all suggest access to knowledge that wasn't developed through gradual human progress, but was transmitted from more advanced sources. Recent discoveries using ground-penetrating radar and other advanced survey techniques have revealed vast underground complexes beneath many ancient sites. Beneath the Giza Plateau, extensive tunnel systems and chambers have been mapped that extend far beyond what's visible on the surface. Similar underground networks have been found beneath sites in Turkey, Peru, and other locations worldwide. These subterranean complexes often show signs of advanced construction techniques, precise geometric layouts, and purposes that remain mysterious. Some researchers speculate they may represent the hidden infrastructure of civilizations that operated beneath the surface, while primitive humans developed above ground. Others suggest they could be refuges or bases maintained by beings who withdrew from surface visibility but remained present in concealed locations. The consistency with which ancient texts describe gods retreating to underground realms takes on new significance when viewed alongside these archaeological discoveries. The Mesopotamian descriptions of the Anunnaki dwelling in subterranean chambers, the Greek myths of Hades ruling the underworld, the Hindu accounts of advanced beings living beneath the earth, may preserve accurate geographical information rather than purely symbolic descriptions. Modern UFO phenomena add another dimension to this investigation. The technological capabilities described in ancient texts, flying vehicles that could move between earth and sky, beings with advanced knowledge who occasionally interacted with humans, match closely with contemporary reports of unidentified aerial phenomena and contact experiences. The consistency between ancient accounts and modern encounters suggests possible continuity of contact rather than entirely separate phenomena. If advanced beings withdrew from direct rule but maintained observation of human development, they might occasionally intervene or make contact when circumstances warrant such involvement. Government acknowledgement of unexplained aerial phenomena, previously dismissed as fantasy or delusion, lends credibility to the possibility that advanced beings continue to operate in our vicinity. The capabilities demonstrated by these craft, instantaneous acceleration, right-angle turns at high speed, operation both in atmosphere and underwater, match descriptions found in ancient texts with startling precision. The timing of increased UFO activity, coinciding with humanity's development of nuclear weapons and space travel capabilities, suggests that our technological advancement may have triggered renewed attention from beings who have been observing our development. Just as ancient texts describe divine intervention during critical periods of human development, modern contact may represent guidance during another crucial transition phase. The genetic research revealing that human DNA contains markers from multiple hominid species raises questions about whether such genetic manipulation was entirely natural or involved deliberate intervention. The complexity of human genetics, the rapid development of cognitive capabilities that distinguishes us from other primates, and the global distribution of similar genetic markers suggest processes that may have been guided rather than purely random. Recent discoveries in quantum physics and consciousness research are beginning to validate capabilities described in ancient texts that were previously dismissed as supernatural. The ability to influence matter through consciousness, telepathic communication, access to information beyond sensory input, all appear to be natural phenomena that operate according to physical laws we're only beginning to understand. These discoveries suggest that the advanced capabilities attributed to ancient gods may represent normal human potential that has been temporarily suppressed or forgotten, rather than supernatural powers belonging only to divine beings. If so, then the withdrawal of direct divine rule may have been intended to allow humanity to rediscover these capabilities independently, achieving genuine spiritual and technological maturity rather than remaining dependent on external guidance. The cyclical prophecies found in ancient traditions take on new relevance when viewed from this perspective. The Hindu concept of yugas, the Mayan calendar cycles, the Hopi prophecies of world transitions, may represent actual knowledge of cosmic cycles that govern planetary development. If beings with extended lifespans and deep understanding of natural patterns establish these prophetic frameworks, they may represent practical guidance for navigating recurring challenges that affect all developing civilizations. The current global situation, with its environmental crises, technological dangers, and social upheavals, matches closely the conditions described in ancient prophecies as marking the end of one age and the beginning of another. The convergence of multiple crisis factors suggests we may be approaching another transition point where guidance from more advanced sources becomes available or necessary. The preservation of ancient knowledge in various forms, from megalithic monuments to esoteric traditions to genetic memories, may represent an information storage system designed to become accessible when humanity reaches appropriate levels of development. As we develop technologies capable of decoding ancient sites, translating forgotten languages, and understanding cosmic patterns, we may be unlocking guidance that was deliberately preserved for this time. The question of whether gods once ruled the earth thus becomes inseparable from the question of whether such guidance continues today in forms we haven't yet learned to recognize. The evidence suggests that our relationship with sources of advanced knowledge and guidance has been ongoing throughout human history, sometimes direct and visible, sometimes hidden and indirect, but never entirely absent. The implications extend beyond historical curiosity to practical questions about human potential, planetary stewardship, and our role in larger cosmic patterns. If we are not alone, if advanced guidance remains available, if human capabilities extend far beyond current limitations, then our approach to individual development and collective challenges may need fundamental revision. The ancient texts consistently emphasize that contact with advanced beings requires spiritual development alongside intellectual growth. The withdrawal of direct divine rule may represent not abandonment, but a test, an opportunity for humanity to demonstrate that it can develop wisdom commensurate with its growing technological power. The gods of antiquity may not have departed as completely as conventional history suggests. Their influence may continue through channels we haven't yet learned to perceive, their guidance available to those who develop the spiritual sensitivity and moral responsibility necessary to receive it properly. The evidence points not toward ancient visitation that ended long ago, but toward ongoing relationship that continues to evolve as humanity matures. Whether we interpret this evidence as literal truth or profound metaphor, its implications remain transformative. We are participants in a vast educational process overseen by intelligence that encompasses far longer perspectives than individual human lives. Our current challenges and opportunities exist within patterns that have been observed and guided before, and resources for navigation remain available to those who learn how to access them. The stones still stand, the myths still whisper, the evidence still accumulates, and somewhere, perhaps closer than we imagine, the beings who once walked among us as gods continue their patient work, waiting for humanity to demonstrate readiness for the next phase of an education that spans not just centuries, but cosmic ages. The question isn't whether they existed, but whether we're prepared to recognize their continuing presence and the responsibilities it implies for our own development and the future of our world. The convergence of all these threads, these whispered memories preserved across millennia, brings us to perhaps the most profound realization of our investigation. We stand today not at the end of this mystery, but at what may be its most critical juncture. For if the evidence we've examined holds truth, if the gods of antiquity were indeed real beings who shaped human civilization before withdrawing into the shadows, then we must confront an unsettling possibility that changes everything about our present moment. The patterns we've traced through ancient texts and megalithic monuments, through flood traditions and genetic bottlenecks, all point towards cycles of intervention and withdrawal that operate on timescales far longer than recorded history. The beings who once ruled directly from golden thrones and crystal chambers didn't simply vanish into mythological memory. According to the most consistent accounts across cultures, they retreated, positioning themselves as observers and occasional guides rather than direct governors. But withdrawal is not disappearance, and 12,000 years, though vast by human standards, represents merely a brief interval for beings described as possessing lifespans measured in tens of thousands of years. If the Anunnaki, the Neteru, the Devas were real entities with such extraordinary longevity, then they would still be present today, watching the unfolding of human civilization with the patient attention of gardeners observing the growth of carefully tended plants. This perspective transforms our understanding of recorded history itself. The rise of Egypt, the glory of Greece, the expansion of Rome, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, our current technological age, all become brief chapters in a single continuous narrative, observed by witnesses whose memory spans the entire arc of human development. Events that seem monumental to us, civilizations that appear to rise and fall independently, may be part of carefully orchestrated patterns, guided by intelligence operating from a perspective we can barely comprehend. The mystery schools that emerged after the departure of direct divine rule begin to make perfect sense when viewed through this lens. The Egyptian priesthood, with their jealously guarded secrets, the Eleusinian mysteries of Greece, the Vedic traditions of India, the shamanic practices of indigenous peoples worldwide, all maintained remarkably similar core teachings despite geographical isolation and cultural differences. Their emphasis on cycles of time, humanity's place in cosmic patterns, and techniques for accessing higher states of consciousness suggests connection to sources of knowledge that transcended individual human discovery. These traditions weren't creating elaborate philosophical systems from imagination. They were preserving and transmitting actual information received from beings whose understanding of natural laws and cosmic cycles far exceeded that of primitive humans. The initiatory structure of these schools, with their progressive levels of revelation and strict requirements for advancement, mirrors exactly what we might expect if advanced beings were maintaining indirect guidance through carefully selected human intermediaries. The consistency of this hidden curriculum across cultures becomes even more striking when we consider the specific knowledge preserved within these traditions. Advanced understanding of astronomy and mathematics, sophisticated techniques for altering consciousness, detailed maps of subtle energy systems in the human body, all appear in traditions that supposedly developed independently. The precision and sophistication of this knowledge suggests transmission from sources with capabilities far exceeding those of ancient humans. Archaeological discoveries using modern technology continue to reveal evidence that supports this interpretation. Ground-penetrating radar has mapped vast underground complexes beneath sites like Giza, Teotihuacan, and other ancient centers. These subterranean networks often show signs of advanced construction techniques and purposes that remain mysterious to conventional archaeology. The consistency with which ancient texts describe gods dwelling in underground realms takes on new significance when viewed alongside these physical discoveries. Recent revelations about unidentified aerial phenomena add another crucial dimension to our investigation. Government acknowledgement of objects displaying capabilities that exceed known human technology, craft that can accelerate instantaneously, make right-angle turns at impossible speeds, and operate seamlessly in air and water, matches precisely the descriptions of divine vehicles found in ancient texts. The Vimanas of India, the flying discs of Mesopotamian accounts, the celestial chariots described across cultures, all display the same impossible flight characteristics reported by modern military witnesses. The timing of increased UAP activity, coinciding with humanity's development of nuclear weapons and space travel capabilities, suggests that our technological advancement may have triggered renewed attention from beings who have been observing our development. Just as ancient accounts describe divine intervention during critical periods of human history, modern encounters may represent guidance during another crucial transition phase in our species' development. The implications extend far beyond historical curiosity into practical questions about human potential and planetary stewardship. Recent advances in quantum physics and consciousness research are beginning to validate capabilities described in ancient texts that were previously dismissed as supernatural fantasy. The ability to influence matter through focused intention, telepathic communication between individuals, access to information beyond normal sensory channels, all appear to be natural phenomena operating according to physical laws we're only beginning to understand. These discoveries suggest that the extraordinary abilities attributed to ancient gods may represent normal human potential that has been temporarily suppressed rather than supernatural powers belonging exclusively to divine beings. If so, then the withdrawal of direct divine rule may have been intended to allow humanity to rediscover these capabilities independently, achieving genuine spiritual and technological maturity rather than remaining permanently dependent on external guidance. The genetic evidence adds another layer to this interpretation. Recent studies revealing that modern human DNA contains fragments from multiple hominid species demonstrate that human evolution involved more complexity than previously understood. The rapid development of cognitive capabilities that distinguishes us from other primates, the global distribution of similar genetic markers, and the existence of dormant genetic sequences whose functions remain mysterious, all suggest processes that may have involved deliberate guidance rather than purely random mutation and selection. The prophetic traditions preserved across cultures take on profound relevance when viewed from this expanded perspective. The Hindu concept of yugas describing vast cycles of spiritual rise and decline, the Mayan calendar systems tracking cosmic transitions, the Hopi prophecies describing signs that herald the end of one world and the beginning of another, may represent actual knowledge of natural cycles that govern planetary development, rather than religious speculation about divine judgment. Current global conditions match closely the descriptions found in these ancient prophecies of times marking transitions between ages. Environmental degradation, social upheaval, technological dangers, spiritual confusion, all appear as recurring themes in prophetic literature describing periods when divine intervention becomes necessary to prevent complete collapse. The convergence of multiple crisis factors in our current era suggests we may be approaching another transition point where guidance from more advanced sources becomes available or even essential for human survival. The preservation of ancient knowledge in various forms begins to appear as a sophisticated information storage system designed to become accessible when humanity reaches appropriate levels of development. As we develop technologies capable of decoding megalithic sites, translating forgotten languages, mapping underground complexes, and understanding cosmic patterns, we may be unlocking guidance that was deliberately preserved for this specific time in our species' development. The megalithic monuments scattered across the globe may function as more than impressive architectural achievements or astronomical observatories. Their mathematical precision, their incorporation of advanced geometric principles, their alignment with celestial phenomena across vast time periods suggest they may serve as permanent information repositories, encoding knowledge in stone that could survive even global catastrophes. The fact that we're only now developing the technological sophistication necessary to fully decode their messages may not be coincidental. Modern physics is revealing that consciousness itself may be a fundamental force in the universe, rather than merely an emergent property of complex neural networks. Research into quantum mechanics, morphic fields, and non-local correlations suggests that information can be transmitted and accessed through channels that transcend normal space-time limitations. These discoveries provide potential mechanisms by which ancient knowledge could be preserved and transmitted across vast periods without requiring physical storage media. The spiritual traditions that emerged after the withdrawal of direct divine rule may represent training systems designed to help humans develop the consciousness capabilities necessary to access these non-physical information channels. The meditative practices, the specific techniques for altering awareness, the emphasis on moral and spiritual development alongside intellectual growth, all begin to appear as practical preparation for contact with sources of advanced guidance rather than merely religious observance. The consistency with which these traditions emphasize that contact with higher beings requires spiritual development alongside intellectual growth suggests important safeguards built into the relationship between humans and more advanced entities. The withdrawal of direct divine rule may represent not abandonment, but a testing phase, an opportunity for humanity to demonstrate that it can develop wisdom commensurate with its growing technological power before being granted access to even more advanced knowledge. This interpretation transforms our understanding of individual human potential and collective responsibility. Rather than being isolated intelligences struggling alone in an empty universe, we may be participants in a vast educational process overseen by beings whose perspective encompasses far longer time periods than individual human lives. Our current challenges and opportunities exist within patterns that have been observed and guided before, with resources for navigation remaining available to those who learn how to access them properly. The question of whether gods once ruled the earth thus becomes inseparable from questions about ongoing guidance, hidden presence, and humanity's readiness for renewed direct contact. The evidence suggests not ancient visitation that ended long ago, but continuing relationship that has evolved as humanity has matured. Moving from direct governance through various stages of indirect guidance toward what may eventually become conscious collaboration between species. The implications for our understanding of human destiny are staggering. Rather than being the random product of blind evolutionary forces struggling toward an uncertain future without guidance or purpose, we may be the carefully nurtured creation of beings whose wisdom encompasses cosmic scales of time and space. Our development may be following patterns that have been successfully navigated by countless other species on countless other worlds, with assistance available from sources we're only beginning to recognize. The current global crisis, rather than representing proof of human failure or divine abandonment, may mark the approach of another phase in our species' guided development. The challenges we face, environmental degradation, technological dangers, social upheaval, may be natural growing pains that occur when developing civilizations reach certain thresholds of capability. The guidance systems established by our ancient teachers may be designed precisely for such transition periods, providing resources for navigation when the need becomes critical. Whether this guidance manifests through renewed direct contact, through activation of dormant human capabilities, through access to preserved ancient knowledge, or through combinations of all these possibilities, the evidence suggests that humanity is not alone in facing the challenges of our current age. The beings who once walked among us as gods may be closer than we imagine, their presence hidden not by vast distances, but by our limited ability to perceive beyond the narrow band of reality our current consciousness can access. The ancient promise of return, found in traditions worldwide, may not refer to dramatic future events but to gradual restoration of contact as humanity develops the wisdom and spiritual maturity necessary to engage safely with sources of advanced knowledge. The gods of antiquity may never have truly departed, maintaining their presence in dimensions of reality we're only beginning to explore, waiting patiently for our consciousness to expand sufficiently to recognize their continuing guidance. As we stand at what may be another crucial juncture in human development, the question becomes not whether we are alone, but whether we are ready to acknowledge that we never have been. The evidence we've examined points toward a reality far more extraordinary than conventional history acknowledges, one in which humanity's relationship with advanced intelligence has been ongoing throughout our species' development, sometimes visible and direct, sometimes hidden and subtle, but never entirely absent. The stones still stand as silent witnesses to capabilities that exceed our current understanding. The myths still whisper their warnings and promises across the centuries. The genetic and archaeological evidence continues to accumulate, slowly forcing recognition of patterns that challenge every assumption about human origins and potential. And somewhere, perhaps in dimensions parallel to our own, perhaps in underground facilities we haven't yet discovered, perhaps in spacecraft observing from carefully concealed positions, the beings who once ruled the Earth continue their patient work. The greatest mystery may not be whether gods once walked among us, but whether we possess the wisdom and courage to recognize their continuing presence and accept the responsibilities that such recognition would bring. For if the evidence points toward truth, if we are indeed participants in a guided evolutionary process overseen by intelligence that spans cosmic scales, then our understanding of human potential, planetary stewardship, and cosmic citizenship may need to undergo the most fundamental transformation in our species' recorded history. The question that began our investigation, did ancient gods once rule the Earth, leads inevitably to a more immediate and pressing inquiry. Are we prepared for their return? The answer to that question may be written not in distant prophecies or ancient promises, but in the subtle shifts occurring around us right now. For as we've traced these patterns through millennia of human memory, we've discovered something that should make us pause and look more carefully at our present moment. The signs that once heralded divine intervention, the markers that ancient peoples recognized as harbingers of cosmic transition, are appearing again in our modern world with a frequency and intensity that cannot be ignored. Consider the acceleration of discovery that characterizes our current age. Archaeological revelations that overturn decades of accepted theory arrive with startling regularity. Technologies that were purely theoretical just years ago become practical realities almost overnight. Scientific paradigms that seemed unshakable crumble before evidence that demands entirely new frameworks of understanding. This isn't the gradual progress that marked earlier centuries, but something far more dramatic, as if knowledge long hidden is suddenly becoming accessible to minds ready to receive it. The timing is significant. Ancient traditions consistently describe periods of rapid awakening that precede major transitions in human development. The Egyptian texts speak of times when the veils between worlds grow thin, when knowledge once reserved for the highest initiates becomes available to broader populations. The Hindu concepts of yuga transitions describe similar periods when cosmic influences shift, making previously inaccessible wisdom suddenly comprehensible to prepared minds. We may be living through such a period now. The explosion of information, the democratization of knowledge once guarded by exclusive institutions, the emergence of technologies that seem to appear faster than human ingenuity alone should allow, all suggest influences beyond ordinary human innovation. The internet itself, connecting human consciousness in ways that mirror descriptions of telepathic networks found in ancient texts, may represent more than technological achievement. Recent developments in quantum physics have begun to validate concepts that mystics and ancient texts have described for millennia. Non-locality, the instantaneous connection between particles regardless of distance, mirrors the interconnectedness that spiritual traditions have always claimed underlies apparent separation. Consciousness research is discovering that awareness itself may be a fundamental force rather than merely an emergent property of complex neural networks. These aren't gradual scientific advances building slowly on previous knowledge. They represent paradigm shifts that seem to arise almost spontaneously, as if information is being downloaded directly into human consciousness from sources beyond individual discovery. The consistency with which breakthrough insights emerge simultaneously in multiple locations, often among researchers who have had no contact with each other, suggests coordination from levels of intelligence that transcend individual human minds. The genetic research revealing dormant capabilities within human DNA takes on new significance when viewed alongside these rapid advances in consciousness studies. Sequences that appear to be inactive may simply be awaiting the proper activation signals, capabilities that have been temporarily suppressed rather than permanently lost. The potential for telepathic communication, extended lifespans, direct perception of subtle energies, all the abilities attributed to ancient gods, may exist as latent possibilities within our own genetic heritage. Environmental pressures that threaten global stability might serve as catalysts for such activation. Crisis often triggers evolutionary leaps, forcing organisms to access capabilities that remain dormant during periods of stability. The current convergence of environmental degradation, resource depletion, and social upheaval may be creating conditions that naturally activate dormant human potential, allowing our species to develop capabilities necessary for survival and advancement. The increasing reports of unexplained phenomena, from unidentified aerial objects to spontaneous healing experiences to documented cases of telepathic communication, suggest that the boundaries between ordinary and extraordinary are becoming more permeable. Mainstream institutions that once dismissed such reports as delusion or fraud are beginning to acknowledge that something genuinely anomalous is occurring with increasing frequency. This shift in official recognition parallels historical patterns that preceded major transitions in human understanding. The emergence of new paradigms often begins with isolated reports that gradually gain credibility as evidence accumulates beyond the threshold of denial. We may be witnessing the early stages of such a transition, as phenomena that were once relegated to the margins of human experience move toward mainstream acknowledgement. The younger generation's natural comfort with concepts that older populations find difficult to accept suggests that consciousness itself may be evolving. Ideas about interconnectedness, multidimensional reality, and non-physical forms of communication that required years of study for previous generations to grasp seem almost intuitive to minds that have never known a world without global digital connection. This generational shift in consciousness may represent more than cultural change. If human awareness is genuinely expanding, if dormant capabilities are beginning to activate, if the barriers between ordinary and extraordinary consciousness are dissolving, then we may be witnessing the early stages of the kind of transformation that ancient texts describe as marking transitions between ages. The proliferation of spiritual practices and consciousness-expanding techniques in mainstream culture suggests that large numbers of people are intuitively seeking to develop capabilities that were once reserved for specialized initiates. Meditation, once confined to monasteries and ashrams, is now taught in schools and corporate boardrooms. Energy healing practices appear in medical centers. Ancient wisdom traditions find new expression through modern scientific language. This democratization of esoteric knowledge mirrors descriptions found in prophetic texts of times when hidden wisdom becomes openly available. The Hopi traditions speak of a time when sacred knowledge will be shared freely as preparation for major planetary transitions. Similar themes appear in other indigenous prophecies and ancient spiritual texts, suggesting that widespread accessibility to formerly secret teachings may be a natural precursor to evolutionary leaps. The convergence of multiple crisis points in our current era, rather than indicating impending doom, may represent the natural pressures that catalyze such evolutionary advances. Environmental challenges, technological dangers, and social upheavals create conditions that demand new capabilities from human consciousness. Crisis becomes opportunity when it forces development of latent potential that might otherwise remain dormant. Ancient texts consistently describe divine intervention as occurring during such transitional periods, when developing civilizations reach thresholds that require guidance to navigate successfully. The increasing accessibility of advanced knowledge, the activation of dormant human capabilities, and the emergence of phenomena that transcend ordinary understanding may all be signs that such guidance is becoming available again. The question becomes whether humanity will recognize and accept this guidance when it manifests, or whether our attachment to current paradigms will prevent us from perceiving what may be the most significant opportunity in our species' development. The evidence suggests that the beings who once provided direct guidance haven't disappeared, but have been waiting for human consciousness to develop sufficiently to engage with them as conscious partners rather than dependent subjects. The shift from divine rule to human self-governance that marked the end of the Golden Age may have been preparation for this moment, when our species would be ready to resume conscious collaboration with sources of advanced intelligence. The withdrawal wasn't abandonment but education, allowing humanity to develop the independence and wisdom necessary for mature relationship with cosmic mentors. Signs of this readiness are emerging in multiple fields simultaneously. Scientific research is validating ancient wisdom about the nature of consciousness and reality. Technological development is creating capabilities that mirror those attributed to divine beings. Spiritual practices are producing documented effects that transcend conventional understanding of human limitation. The convergence of these developments suggests that we may be approaching the moment when the question changes from whether gods once ruled the earth to whether we're prepared to recognize their continuing presence and accept invitation to conscious participation in cosmic community. The ancient promise of return may be fulfilling itself not through dramatic external intervention, but through internal awakening of capabilities that have always been present but temporarily dormant. The gods may return not as external saviors, but as aspects of our own expanded consciousness, as we remember and reclaim abilities that were once natural to our species. And so we arrive at the quiet end of our journey, not with certainty carved in stone, but with questions that shimmer like stars in the darkness between what we know and what we remember. The evidence we've traced through clay tablets and megalithic monuments, through flood traditions and genetic memories, whispers the same unsettling possibility that our ancestors weren't creating myths, but preserving the most profound truth they possessed. Perhaps the gods of antiquity were never truly gone, but simply withdrew to dimensions beyond our current perception, waiting patiently for humanity to develop the wisdom necessary to recognize their continuing presence. The stones still stand, the myths still echo, and somewhere in the expanding edges of our consciousness, we may be rediscovering that we were never alone. Thank you for walking this ancient path with me tonight. Until we meet again in the shadows between history and mystery, keep questioning, keep wondering, and remember that the deepest truths often hide in plain sight.